if you were to do something like that at home, it could be as easy as just like taking the blue cheese, letting it sit in the vodka, maybe shaking the jar a bunch of times over the course of a couple of hours, and then freezing it.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. The goal of this show is to understand the inner workings and evolution of mixology, hospitality, and community. As I further my own knowledge of the field, I'm inviting you to join me. You'll hear me interview people from around the industry about their work and beliefs. If you like what you hear, the best way to keep up is to subscribe via the podcast app you use. And if you think others will like this, I invite you to share an episode or write a review. Your words help grow our audience. And you can keep up with the latest news via our newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, or see what we're working on via Instagram. And please reach out. I'd enjoy hearing what you liked, learned, and what else you'd like to see me dig into. So let's get into it. My guest today is Corey Moszer. He's the beverage director at the Lucky Accomplice, also known as TLA, which has been recognized as a Best New Restaurant by St. Louis Magazine, Sauce Magazine, and the Riverfront Times, as well as the soon-to-open concept Press, which is an elevated, fast casual joint. Corey has more than 15 years of bartending experience. Prior to TLA, he was the assistant beverage manager at Atomic Cowboy, a beloved longtime late-night spot in St. Louis, RIP, and he was the beverage director for Firecracker Pizza and Beer. He took on building that program from scratch with 66 beers on tap. After the Lucky Accomplice had been open for a little while, he was kind of brought in for a couple of relief shifts while people were away, and he really fell into love with the use of seasonal ingredients and the collaboration between the kitchen and the bar teams. And so the rest is history, as they say. What struck me when I was chatting with Corey in advance and during the interview is not only a level of interest that he brings for his craft, which I think is very, very common in the bartending world of people I've been fortunate to meet, but also definitely a deep level of humility. I think despite creating things that are being put on pedestals, Corey very much considers himself a student of the practice, and I thought that was nice. It was nice to see. In this interview, you're going to be hit by a lot of heavy jargon at times, like gastrovac and sous vide and fat separator. Links and notes out to all of that is in the show notes. So if you need anything on that, please feel free to take a look. One of the reasons why those big words came up is Corey was talking about a fat wash. If we haven't talked about fat wash before, this is essentially when you use something like an olive oil or a bacon grease, maybe a coconut oil. In this case, blue cheese, in which he is creating an infusion with that. And so in a fat wash, you have kind of this these fatty elements paired with the liquid that is the alcohol, and in the long run it will rise to the top, but not before imparting many of its fatty and mild flavor characteristics into things. So you should definitely click into this and dig into it a little bit. I'm going to have some side content that you can peruse as well, but fat washing is something that is a little intimidating and a little complex, but really not that hard for the home bartender, so something you should probably give a try if you're looking for the next thing in your game. Something else that Corey mentioned, which I think is important, thinking back to the beginning of the pandemic, when we saw clinicians being applauded as they left hospitals and such. In a way, at times, many of our hospitality workers were given some of that grace by many of their patrons, like, hey, thank you so much for being here. But Corey says, as we're kind of moving into a period where we're at the very least becoming more comfortable being out in public and things are relaxing, that he is seeing the return of some of those less generous behaviors towards service workers. And Corey didn't say this with anything that was any great contempt, but a thing to think about. These people are here serving us, and as we think about as a country and how we rebuild going forward. And like some of these jobs we can't find people to fill. How much of that's not only because people aren't being paid appropriately, but do they feel like they're not being treated well? So just a reminder to treat your people well when you're out. Something I had to laugh about too as I was prepping and re-listening to this interview. Over the weekend, I had a class, and during the class, something that comes up often is I was talking with a gentleman, and in particular who was a big bourbon fan, and I was talking about putting club soda in those drinks to kind of open them up. And as happens, sometimes you get daggers thrown at you. People are like, what? What are you saying? Dilute my whiskey? But anyways, during this interview, when I asked Corey what he thought more people should be working on at home, he was almost instant in his reply. I think more people should be working on highball cocktails. And so he talked about using, in particular, and these will all be in the show notes, St. George's Baller Single Malt Whiskey. He talked about Iway 45, which is a Japanese-style whiskey, and really just the ways that that you kind of get to see the spirit in a different light. So I highly and heartily recommend bringing highballs into your repertoire at home. They are a very simple thing to do and less traditional, and will certainly give you a different way to look at your spirits. With that, I look forward to you enjoying my interview with Corey Moszer. So, Corey, thank you for taking time today to come and talk about the work you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
So, early on in your career, you've kind of been in the industry for a long minute. Walk us through kind of the experience that's brought you to the Lucky Accomplice and the current projects that you're working on.
What led me to the Lucky Accomplice was honestly, for lack of a better word, luck. Everything that I was running or a part of was shut down due to the pandemic. And I would say, August or September of 2020, we, tried to give it another go, both with the Atomic Cowboy and Firecracker Pizza and Beer. And we started to get a little bit of traction with the Atomic Cowboy, but I think that the whole vibe changed. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but there was like a pretty hard close at 10 o'clock and you couldn't be open beyond that. And the reason that people were largely coming in there was, it's like a post 10 p.m. kind of hangout place and a dance party, DJs and drinks. So it wasn't the same, and especially not being able to book shows and things like that. It was kind of just another bar in the Grove. And so we shuttered that. Firecracker never got back going. I think just we saw the writing on the wall with Atomic, so we shuttered both of those. And so I was a captain without a ship. So when TLA opened, the Lucky Accomplice opened, my friend Kelsey McClure, who was a part of opening that restaurant, she called me and she said, hey, our bartender, our beverage director, Will Brawley, is going to be out of town. He had an unfortunate death in his friend group and had to go to Kansas City. So she called on me. I came in and covered some shifts over the weekend and left an impression on them, at least a good enough one to get invited back and help them with some of their shift pop-ups that they do. Chef Logan used to run a restaurant called Savage that turned into Shift, and they still do like tasting menu pop-ups there. We still do those now. So went in and hung out for those and helped out, and then they kept me on, and I just became a part of the bar team, and I'm forever grateful for that.
That's great. That's great. So another thing for me that I'm interested in is you certainly have in this world the restaurants and bars that have opened. We know about many of the restaurants that have closed during the pandemic, but the Lucky Accomplice is also one of these places that was born during it. So and it's already gotten some wonderful accolades. Obviously, Chef Logan is seemingly very well received by the community. But tell us a little bit about that, and then after that, I'd be interested for us to talk about how you go about marrying a cocktail program with a fare like that. So.
The restaurant opening during the pandemic, I think that certainly had a lot of challenges, but I think that the blueprint was out there. A lot of people had already started the outdoor dining, and so that was pretty much an opportunity for us to throw some tables out there, test the concept, and see if people were attracted to it. I didn't begin that my tenure there until December. They opened in September. I went in as a guest and was really, really, really impressed with Logan's food. It was my first exposure to his food. I hadn't eaten at Shift. And then the cocktails that they opened up with were a product of a consultant that came in, somebody from Anvil, which is a very, very highly accredited bar in Houston. Yeah, they do. They're like the benchmark for cocktail bars in this country. But so it was a lot of classics: Jungle Bird, Sidecar, things that you would expect to see in like any recipe book. And they also didn't have a bartender at the time. It was shortly thereafter that Will Brawley came on. He was in charge of Billie Jean for some time. So he came over and kind of breathed a little bit of new life into the cocktail program there. And, so yeah, just relegated to outside, trying to get a feel for people's response to the restaurant. And then when restrictions started opening up a little bit, we were able to put some seats inside and kind of test that out and just grow and grow and grow. So as like we got to get closer to full capacity, I think then word started getting out. And there were some nice pieces written about the restaurant. And then it's been kind of full steam ahead since then.
One of the things I'm interested in addition is it seems like, so wine and beer, from my perspective as an industry, are kind of ahead of, like, they began their arc before spirits and cocktails did. Mm-hmm. And wine pairings are obviously a very common thing, you know, in certain restaurants in particular. You will have, beers that can be recommended to be paired with various foods. You know, as you think about rolling out, the cuisine there, are there, and hey, people should drink whatever they want. Mm-hmm. But if you are, if someone's ordering a dish, is there a way you begin to think about pairing a cocktail or flavors with a dish? Are there any general rules of thumb that come to mind for you?
Yes. I think things are constantly evolving so quickly there. Logan will have a dish on the menu for a couple months or sometimes a couple of days, depending on how he feels about it or, how it progresses. I think what I take into consideration when making a new cocktail for the list is, as always, fresh ingredients. We source everything from farms. So going through and looking at our purveyors every week, seeing what's available, seeing what is, what he's already bringing in, and trying to incorporate a lot of those ingredients into the cocktails when possible. I think I didn't come in with this like deep knowledge about craft cocktails. I've always had a fascination with it, and having worked under some of the people that I've had, just have some exposure to it. But it wasn't until I started there and started thinking outside of the box a little bit and was challenged by Logan to take some of those fresh ingredients or concepts and techniques from the kitchen and apply those to the beverage program at TLA. So initially when I started there, I think there's a cocktail on the menu now, and it's called And the Beat Goes On. And that's a blue cheese wash vodka, dill-infused blanc vermouth, and then a beet peppercorn shrub. That came purely from a carrot dish that Chef Logan used to have on the menu. It came in this beautiful Barrajoule sauce. It was these dehydrated carrots with dill. So I tried to take some of those flavors and incorporate them into a cocktail, and it just turned out that beets were an easier root vegetable at the time to work with than carrots were. So that was kind of like my first foray into sort of mirroring techniques and ingredients from the kitchen and applying that to the beverage program there.
One of the things I feel like is always my task is to kind of look at the work that people like you are doing and to figure out how do we make this a little bit more accessible for people. So if you think about that cocktail, because some things require quite a bit of prep in order, like, if you were going to, clarifying milk isn't impossible, but it's not easy. But if you think about, washing vodka with blue cheese or using beet, I guess I'm curious, are there parts of that process that aren't terribly difficult that, if someone has, was looking for an experiment at home, is blue cheese infusion into vodka, is it tricky? Or if you think about like the beet you called on, like, I would be interested to know if there are ingredients you're working on from farms that you'd say, you know what, something that might not be terribly hard for someone. And we can always put some additional copy in the notes. Is there somewhere you'd recommend someone mess around a little bit if they're trying to play?
Yeah, I think, really it's all about like what do you have in your kitchen? A lot of the stuff that I'm using at work was new for me, using, like a circulator or the sous vide technique, or gastrovacs, or, just stuff that I had there that I was not familiar with working with in my everyday life that I now have at my house. So I'll use a circulator. I'll use sous vide to make like pork chops or, eggs or something like that. But, you can always change the technique and end up sort of at the destination that you're going for. Like the technique that I use is I'll take that blue cheese, I'll put it into a jar, and circulate it for 2 hours at 135, so it kind of like emulsifies a little bit, and then you get a lot of that flavor and texture from the cheese into the vodka. Pull that out, freeze it, kind of let that harden, run it through a cheesecloth, and you're left with like a really, really clean product. If you were to do something like that at home, it could be as easy as just like taking the blue cheese, letting it sit in the vodka, maybe shaking the jar a bunch of times over the course of a couple of hours, and then freezing it. The reason that I choose to circulate it is I just think you get a much purer expression of that spirit. You're not losing anything. It's all trapped in that jar and a regulated temperature.
Got it. Yeah. So like I definitely have a little bit of experience myself with like, fat washing with like coconut oil or bacon grease. And so this is kind of a similar process where, and I'll be sure to put a link in the notes, but for people out there who are intrigued by it, it's kind of this idea that in the freezing is obviously like we want, once it separates, we want to be able to pull it off easily and then skim it out there. Yeah.
And that could also be as easy as just getting like a fat separator that you might use at home. And I use that with like olive oil washes. We just put a cachaça cocktail that I do an avocado fat wash with. And that's as easy as getting a fat separator, putting, like 750 mil of cachaça in there. I want to say it was like 8 ounces of avocado oil, and you just kind of shake that up and then let that separate. Same thing, freeze it, but you just pull the little lever and you get all of that spirit, and then you're left with all the solidified fat up top.
I'll tell you what, fat separator is a tool I've not heard of. I will have to look at that right there. I like that. Okay. At present, are there resources that you're currently leaning on as you look for inspiration? Obviously working with the wonderful team at TLA, but are there books and resources you're currently reading, reflecting on, or you kind of keep near the bar looking for inspiration when you think about what you might do next?
Yeah, I don't think it's a unique experience to me, but I'm a voracious reader. I really, really try to keep up on trends that are happening in other cities and going to other cities myself. I just took a trip to Chicago to check out Lost Lake before they closed, and Billy Sunday and Violet Hour, and just sort of see what these like high accolade James Beard, winning bars are up to, just to kind of stay in the know or stay not competitive, but at least, relevant. Brian from the Lucky Accomplice, he and I are going to San Francisco in an effort to do a little bit more R&D for press before we open, but really just keeping your ear to the ground. And I mean, there's so many great tools just online between Punch and Liquor and a couple of websites that I visit daily. And then as far as books, like I think that it's a great time for books. There's so many great things coming out. And if you were to own just like one set of books, I would probably point towards the Death & Co. books. They're incredible, just in terms of ingredients and accessible recipes, techniques, and they're really, to me, I think the gold standard.
It is just a shock to me and really speaks to them when I ask that question all the time, and Death & Co. is almost always the answer. And yeah, they really have kind of trailblazed a thing. And I think, for, with their more recent book, Welcome Home, I think there's certainly that attempt of like, okay, I like that. I think the team kind of did some acknowledging to themselves of like, we've really created some gold standards, but like, if you're not in the industry and reading this, when I think about their Codex book, which I love.
Incredible.
But some of those recipes, when they're drawing some of those relationships, to some people, I think are like, what is happening here? But yeah, it's a wonderful template that they've blazed in that regard right there.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of really like rudimentary books out there too. Meehan's Bartending Manual. I think, I forget the gentleman from Portland, Morgenthaler.
Oh, Jeffrey Morgenthaler.
Yeah,
Bar book.
Bar book's excellent too, just for like standard techniques. When I have somebody that is interested in joining the bar program at TLA, obviously there's like a big vetting process, and there's been very few people that have been a part of it, just because it's, there's not a real need. We're not open enough to have like a huge staff. But I always hand off that first Death & Co book and say, this will give you at least what you need to get going, or at least to ask the questions that you need to ask to have the knowledge that you need to be behind a bar like this. It's always a great opportunity to take someone in and train them, but it's always a lot nicer to have somebody with at least some experience and can answer questions that are going to be asked. I think we're tasked often with being creative and going off script a little bit, just as a test from our guests. They know that we're highly capable bartenders, so they'll come in and say, I'm looking for this, and this, or use of this ingredient or this flavor profile, and we have to be able to deliver on that.
Are there ingredients, and this could be spirits or other things you've worked with, that you like? It seems recently I had a conversation with Steve Smith at the Royale, and he talks about over the longevity of his bar, slowly watching customers' tastes mature and evolve over time. And so it's crazy to watch what is happening in the state of mixology right now. But are there ingredients or spirits that you feel like you put on the menu, and yet people, the consumer still isn't quite ready to try yet? Is there anything that you wish people would try more? Maybe a better way to ask that.
Yeah, I think sometimes people have like a negative connotation to just some spirits in general. Like if you see gin on a menu, some people are like, oh, I just had a very bad experience with gin in college. I'm like, well, a lot's changed since then. It's not all of these like super juniper driven gins anymore. There's a lot of really, really beautiful, super bright expressions. A lot of these New World gins are very floral, very citrusy, and a lot of fun to work with. I think a lot of times people will shy away from something that they're not super duper familiar with, be it cachaça, Genevieve, something like that. So we encourage our guests to step outside of their comfort zone a little bit, and sometimes say, like, what is it that you don't like? You don't like chartreuse, you don't like anise. Well, let me try and paint you a picture that you might like a little bit more. So oftentimes, I think that we try to break those barriers down. But to answer your question, I think people largely sometimes just have an aversion to certain spirits. I don't think that people see things like certain herbs or shrubs or things like that on the menu that they really shy away from.
Okay. Yeah, I still like to think of it as an emotional hangover.
Sure.
That people have from just years of drinking bad stuff. Just because I'm always curious and be ready to share. So, like, if you think about gin as an example, when you might talk about New World gins, is there, for someone listening out there's like, gin's not my thing, and I run into these people all the time. Are there one or two New World gins that come to mind?
Yeah. I should say that I definitely prefer a drier, like a London Dry juniper-driven gin, just for tradition and for the cocktails that I make. But I think 1220 makes a really, really good gin. I think that barrel age that they just did, the 2021 with in the Ruby Port barrels, that is one of the best gins I've ever tried. I was sad to see that go. So that one is a pretty good expression. Let me think for a second. I'm trying to think what we have on our back bar now. I really think the yuzu gin is incredible in terms of like leaning into the citrus component.
And what's that brand called? I don't know that.
It's just called yuzu gin.
Yuzu.
It's Japanese, yeah.
Oh, okay. Huh. Oh, yuzu gin.
Yuzu, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so yuzu being the Japanese citrus. Okay, got it. Okay. Cool. I'll have to look that one up right there.
Yeah, those are both a lot of fun to work with.
Okay. Yeah, I think, that certainly is part of it too, is, I think about the average consumer walking into, Randall's or whatever your large liquor emporium is these days. And it's overwhelming in a way too.
Absolutely.
And, you see the bottles you recommend, to your point, like, okay, you see Beefeater, for example, and you think like, okay, that's what I know about gin, and that's to juniper.
That's what my dad drank, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But all the other ones, and especially in this moment, especially as you put more time and resources into this, people see a price tag of, $30, $35 or whatever, and they go, but I don't know, is that worth it? So I think that there's this thing of like, I don't know, like it's every once in a while I think it's cool for the liquor stores that do have the tasting bar options, because it's like, hey, why don't you spend $3 on this before you spend $35 on this? Because I think for a lot of people it's just this roll of the dice. I don't know. So
yeah, that's the beauty of places like in toxicology, where you can go in and I know that they haven't been doing as much post pandemic or post quarantine, but before they had weekly classes where they were allowing you to come in and try almost anything, and it also came with this like educational component, and that place is so well curated that I think that to come in there and to try some more esoteric spirits, to have some guidance on how to apply it, that we need more places like that for sure.
Yeah, no, for the people listening in St. Louis, that's a big shout out to Intoxicology in terms of the right kind of just curating a menu right there. So at this point, you are part of a concept that has opened during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Are there any changes overall, despite all the hardship that has happened that we've gone through as a country and industry? Are there any things that you feel like are changes for the better in the industry as a result of the pandemic? And no is allowed to be an answer. So,
yeah, I would say I've noticed people sort of slipping back into the similar patterns pre-pandemic, but I think for a while there was a genuine empathy from people who came into restaurants and were like, hey, we see what you guys were going through. We see how hard you were affected, your industry in particular. So I did see a genuine empathy and see people coming through and really celebrating and supporting, and I was thrilled with that. And not that they're getting away from it in a bad way. I just think that there's a sense of normalcy that we're all starting to feel a little bit as things loosen up, or as like we get back out to our day-to-day lives and start going out and seeing shows and having dinners and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit about, you already mentioned it, but press is an upcoming concept that you and your team are working on. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about that, and I'd like to hear, I think we had a conversation about this before, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're thinking about in terms of the cocktail program. You mentioned going out to San Francisco to learn some stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit about press, but also what you envision for the drink side of the equation there.
For the drink side, well, for press in general, I think it's impressive to see Chef Logan's trajectory. He opened up with this beautiful, beautiful tasting menu restaurant that was very much like he was on center stage and in the middle, cooking these incredible dishes, and then opened up TLA as a more approachable but still extremely elevated kind of companion piece to Shift. And now what our goal with press is to really kind of keep that like same ethos, great service, great ingredients, quality in dishes and cocktails, but make it a step further in the accessible direction. So really what we're calling it is elevated fast casual, 40 seats, really like fermented panini press pizza, farm fresh ingredients. I'm not going to speak too much to the food because I think that's still something that Chef is working out for sure. But cocktail wise, same thing. Cheeky cocktails, clever, an opportunity to see some things that you're super familiar with, kind of with an opportunity to learn. So you'll see some, I would say, close to what we're doing at TLA, but everything is going to be in draft format. So largely to be enjoyed there or to take with you. I think we want to see as many people coming in and taking our stuff home as they are sitting in there and enjoying it. So cocktail-wise, I think like I'll take a lot of the core pillars that we're used to, maybe like classically driven Negroni riffs, highballs, old fashions, things like that, and just kind of put a spin on them and find ways to make them more sustainable in that draft format, which can be challenging.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about, because I have some sidebar questions I was anticipating for this. So tell me about steps that a person you might take to make something like that more sustainable in the first place. So, when we think about a Negroni or whatever it is, or a highball, what steps might you be taking in order to better preserve something like that?
That's something that I'm working through right now, and I have a couple of answers for that. Something like a Negroni or a highball, those are just really, really like natural fits for the draft system, because you're not incorporating oftentimes citrus and things like that make those less stable. So when I'm approaching a cocktail, and I'm running all my R&D through TLA right now, in an effort to have these like fully realized concepts for press. So experimenting with like the clarification, milk punch clarification, and that will make something super duper shelf stable, and kind of you can incorporate citrus into that without having to worry about constantly shaking the keg or the citrus turning the complexity of the cocktail, getting that bitterness that you sometimes get, and also working with different acidulants and combinations of that. So replacing the citrus altogether and adding that kind of like a fake brightness, or a prevalent brightness, but not like a fake lime juice almost. Mm-hmm. So using like blends of like citric acid, malic acid, phosphoric acid, things like that, and finding a balance with that in cocktails. And that's something, those are two techniques that I can think of off the top of my head that have really, really been helpful in terms of navigating draft cocktails and some of the things that are prohibitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like another interesting conversation in some markets is like, lime and lemon and all this is fun and no reason not to use it. But the other thing is, it's like, as we talk about a world of slightly more sustainability, it's like, like the bring, trafficking those limes into the country.
Yep.
Yeah, certainly. I remember seeing the meme one time. It was like, customer asks for a paper straw in their drink with like, rum from Guyana, limes from, wherever. Yeah. And so I think the pull of things from across the globe is beautiful, is wonderful. Mm-hmm. But it certainly takes a lot of energy to get some of these things where we are too.
It does. And we are super cognizant of that. And I think that when we came back from break in January, we took 3 weeks off as a company to just sort of hit the reset button, and to come back and to feel inspired. And a part of what I wanted to see a little bit more of in our program was a bigger step towards sustainability, and look at where we are creating waste and how we could cut back on that a little bit, or at least be a little bit more efficient. So taking some of those hulls from the spent limes and making a cordial or a stock, or taking the pineapple pulp and making a syrup from that. And sustainability has become very, very important to us.
And some of this could be just readily available that you're pulling online, but if I were to pull you for a pineapple pulp recipe, a citrus stock recipe, would you be amenable to share that? Because I think for the average person at home too, it's like we have this thing, even for me, like I've looked at citrus stocks before, but I crush that lime, I crush that lemon, and unless I've peeled it already in advance, into the trash it goes, as opposed to giving it a second life. And I guess the thing that that also sticks out to me about that is when it comes particularly to a cordial as well, for the person at home who's not circulating stuff every day, to take the time to make a cordial, you have something more shelf stable in your refrigerator, as opposed to like, oh man, my limes went bad, or this lime juice is bad. But if you get comfortable making cordials, then you can have something more stable, to keep around.
Yeah, and pickling stuff is obviously a huge part of that too. If you've got, sometimes I'll order stuff I make my Bloody Mary mix on Saturdays for Sundays. So it's super duper fresh, but oftentimes you'll run into a case where you have too many peppers or something like that, or you brought in too many strawberries. So, pickling is another way to create some sustainability with that. And also kind of like tinker with those flavor profiles. But yeah, all of that information that I got, the pineapple pulp syrup, the citrus stocks and the different cordials, that's all just coming from reading. Those aren't ideas unique to me at all. Like, definitely someone much smarter than me put that out there, and I'm just running with it and trying to apply it to our program for sure.
Good. Well, if anything, I'll make sure that it's available to people who might want to play with it.
For sure.
As you are, so bringing this back to sometimes people working at home. So if you were going to be entertaining at home, and I know a lot of times, for people in the industry, it's like, when I get off, the first thing I want to do is definitely make more cocktails. But,
yeah, right.
But yesterday was Easter Sunday. I did a few things with my family, and so I brought a batched, sour cocktail.
Awesome.
But any tips for? I guess I'm curious. So someone's having guests over, and they want to batch a cocktail. Mm-hmm. Do you have a preference on? So like I put mine in a standard 750 ml mm-hmm. bottle and just poured it out. And I went ahead and shook it because I was standing right there. But for people looking to host, obviously you're batching your old fashions, your Negronis is super easy. Mm-hmm. But if you were going to batch a sour cocktail for a party, other than, of course, pressing everything fresh, is there a format you prefer to serve that in to have the best cocktail?
Yeah, that could be as simple as your level of comfort with the guests. I mean, punch bowls would be a great opportunity, and it's like a nice, like centerpiece talking point too. Mm-hmm, but mm-hmm. And that really opens up an opportunity to use a lot of ingredients and not have to worry about, turning out a bad cocktail. Mm-hmm. You can use any base spirit, any split build base spirit that you want to do, and just throw some really nice fresh juices and a cordial in there, and then have this large format drink that people can share. And so I think that, to me, is what immediately comes to mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's that. We wish that we could do something like that right now, but I don't know that that's something that the public's ready for.
Sure. So I have a question for you on something that I'm less clear on. Mm-hmm. So there is this big push on, I don't want to say big push, when we think about ordering a margarita, mm-hmm. At the bar, for example, that cocktail is going to be shaken. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to batch a margarita for friends coming over and it was in a punch bowl mm-hmm. instead, what is, whatever, degree technically you're comfortable answering this is fine, but I guess I'm curious, when it's in a punch bowl versus shaken to order, is the cocktail just a little less aerated? Is that the primary? I guess, are we really missing out on a lot of quality or not? And I'm more curious for myself.
That could be as simple as using an immersion blender or something like that. You could very well have around the house too. So you can always aerate it like that, incorporate it a little bit better, and you could shake and dump. That seems really, really tedious, but I would say an immersion blender or something like that would really offer the aeration and things that you need. It's not going to dilute, but I'm assuming that you're throwing some ice in there.
Right.
And then, that's something that you also have to be cognizant of, is not over icing it and muting the cocktail too much.
Sure. Now that's actually a really good tip. So to make sure I follow this, so I've put my margarita into a punch bowl. Mm-hmm. Now I'm sticking an immersion blender into that batch, mm-hmm. which is going to mm-hmm. start up, inject a lot of air into it. And then I drop my large format cube mm-hmm. in there, and it will slowly melt over the course of the party.
Yep.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I feel like I rarely see that addressed that way, because if we have to shake the margarita over here, but something's in a punch bowl, what are we missing? But that idea that you can whip it up that way, that's really helpful. I like that. Thank you.
As much as we can without compromising the integrity of the cocktail at TLA, and I know that they do this at Death & Co. too, but we try to batch as much as we can. And that's to say, if we have, several spirits that are going into a cocktail, we're batching that as much as we can without adding the syrup or the citrus. And oftentimes we'll have these split 4-way builds for a Black Manhattan or a Negroni or something like that you can bottle, and then you're just either stirring it or shaking it beyond that. But I mean, we really try to batch as much as we possibly can at the Lucky Accomplice.
Yeah, it helps you move faster, and you can spend more time
absolutely
serving the customers too. And just to make sure everybody else kept up with that, so for your Black Manhattan, mm-hmm. When we talk about splitting it, essentially you're taking that root recipe, typically, and obviously you can manipulate it a little bit, but mm-hmm. you might be taking your 2 ounces of your spirit mm-hmm. and splitting it up amongst 4 of it. Yeah, I feel like that's one of those things that people are they look at your Black Manhattan, and they don't even realize it could be a Manhattan because you've got 5 things happening there, and like for them, they're like, but a black Manhattan, if they even know what that is, only has 2 things in it, so to speak.
Yeah. And certainly we've taken liberties with ours, and it goes through a barrel aging process. But I mean, that was just an example. Like mostly, any opportunity that we have to batch, those ingredients will go into a Cambro, and I'll hit them with an immersion blender, and then bottle those, and then after the fact, like we've got our standard recipe, we've got our batch recipe, and then we've got our bottle recipe. So we'll take what's in that bottle and say, we know that 3 ounces is coming out of this, add 5 ounces of lemon juice, 2 dashes of cherry ginger bitter, whatever the case may be. And then just batch for efficiency and make sure that we're getting, the same quality and same beauty from our cocktails, but just in a very more expedited manner.
Okay. So we're kind of getting through many of the questions that I was bringing into this, but I do have another one, and this could be just general tips. So say someone does decide to, they're having guests over, and they would like to tend bar in some basic fashion. The first thing I would suggest is, 1, don't offer your guests 10 different drinks, have 3 available. But for me, one of the things that's been most driven home is, as you see in a professional bar, keeping the bar tidy and organized is just essential. But so if I'm going to shake up some cocktails at home, and maybe I'm going to make 2 or 3 of them, is it really just, so I think about the ingredients. I got my shaker here, I've got bottles, I've got syrups, I've got juices. Would you set that up anyway, or just decide I'm setting it up this way and I'm going to keep it set up this way the whole time? Because I've worked at a disorganized home bar before, and the bottle of Cointreau is right in front of you and you can't see it. So I don't know if I'm asking a clear question, but I think one of the things I'm interested in is, how do I simplify happy hour for the lay person at home? And if they are tending bar, are there any tips for making sure that they don't create a nightmare for themselves?
Yeah, I think that just depends on what kind of person you are. I myself am a professional bartender, but in my life am generally pretty tidy too. So I'm constantly resetting to 0 and making sure that my station and my mise en place and everything is really dialed and tidy. That dialed is a word that we often use behind the bar at TLA in terms of just hey, are we dialed? Are we, reset to 0? Is everything spec? So as I work, I find myself just constantly resetting. And if I were entertaining at home, I think that I would do the same thing. But really, it would be just person-to-person setup in a way where if we're making margaritas, and you've got your lime juice bottled, and you've got your spirit, and you've got your triple sec, Cointreau, whatever it is, just make sure that everything's accessible. Make sure that everything is just being reset as you go. Right. I think that makes for a cleaner appearance, and then obviously you can work more efficiently if you're not looking around for anything. But yeah, just set it up in a very efficient manner for you, that you can easily reset, easily go back and do everything that you need to do, and then obviously you need to rinse your tins out and things like that. But,
yeah, because when you think about watching, someone like yourself and on a Friday night at 8 at Lucky Accomplice, the whole idea is a lot of times, watching someone like yourself work, it's you're only half looking for the bottle because you know exactly where it is. And so, and especially you're at home talking with a couple of guests, you want to know roughly, okay, the juices are on the right, syrups are in the middle, spirits are on the left, etc. And so that way, and they always go back the minute you're done. So that way, the home bar is not only tidy, but you're not as stressed out trying to figure out where stuff is.
Yeah, and then also maybe having it set up in a way that's clean to you and you're able to work from, but also creating almost like a conversation piece where you've got, you're set up and people are looking at it and they're like, oh, that's really cool. What kind of tequila are you using? Or why are you using, Dufard versus Cambier? Not that conversation would happen at a home bar or anything like that. But
it could, but yeah, it's probably a little dialed in. But yeah, that's
yeah. I would just say for the person, work in a way that makes you comfortable, but I would say that tidiness and appearance and efficiency are key for sure.
Okay. Is there, so a couple of final questions on my part, and if there's anything else you'd like to cover, let me know. Is there, so we've already talked about a couple of different gins, but is there anything like, someone out there right now has got a little extra cash burning a hole in their pocket right now? If they were going to go out to the store right now, hey, you know what, something I think you might enjoy having on your home bar is this.
I'm having a lot of fun with highballs right now, and I think that they are complex and simple at the same time. I think that you can use any spirit that you want to. I'm sincerely fascinated by Japanese whiskeys right now, and I think that that's obviously the ideal way to drink them, to help kind of add that like effervescence and kind of water them down a little bit so you get those like deeper nuances to it. But you're not just relegated to Japanese whiskeys. Like I have a melon cocktail on tap right now in highball format that is just like a melon liqueur and lemongrass sochu and Japanese vodka. But I think that that's a really cool way to make an interesting cocktail at home without having to break the bank unless you want to. You get like a nice single malt, like the St. George Baller whiskey is. I'm fascinated by that right now. I think highballs are perfect for aspiring home bartenders or anybody looking to deeper educate themselves on a particular spirit, or like we were talking about earlier, split builds. That I use the St. George Baller single malt right now in a split build with the UA 45 because to me that one has more bourbony characteristics and it kind of offsets like the almost funk of the Baller. So I think that is a really fun way to kind of like hone your craft as a home bartender.
So first, thanks for saying that because it feels like to me, and there's obviously a spectrum of people out there enjoying things at home, but it feels like there is still at times this obligation that like we need to have this neat or in an old-fashioned format, and this idea of thinning the drink out, opening up new flavors, and making it something that's less likely to put us under the table, at 5 p.m. Is fun, and just something I think people don't play with enough right there.
For sure.
Yeah, there seems to almost be this fear of diluting the drink in terms of are we taking something away from it? Yeah,
I mean sometimes it's necessary in a cocktail. It depends on what your goal is, And I think a lot of times with those highballs, or at least what I'm trying to do at Press and the Lucky Accomplice, is to just find like a large format cocktail that I can batch and then not have to worry about for a week or two, or really just like explore what different spirits are capable of. It's not, I think if you're throwing that Baller in an old fashioned, or if you're throwing it, in a penicillin or something like that, it'll be great. But like really giving it legs and stretching out a little bit, I think you're really able to unpack it. I mean, that's the whole idea behind throwing a little bit of water into a nice bourbon,
Yeah. Last thing that I have, and I won't hold you to any of this, but to people out there who might be curious, is there a tentative date for Press yet, or are we for Press to open, or are we too far out to know when that might happen right now?
No, I think we're all really, really like kind of honed in on early to mid-June for sure. Brian and I are going to go to San Francisco and kind of like, like I said, see what's going on the coast and see what some of the elite bartenders out there are up to, or just kind of what ingredients they're playing with, and kind of in a lot of the aesthetics of some of their bars and restaurants out there, I think, are in a class of their own. So we'll get back, and then I think we're really going to just kind of like button up the last few details. But yeah, let's say mid-June, cautiously optimistic.
Wonderful. That's great. Corey, thanks for taking the time today to chat.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you liked the interview, the transcript and show notes are located at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself, Chris LeBeau. Subscribe to avoid missing an episode, and if you think this is good stuff, share it with a friend or review us on your listening platform. And check out our newsletter, Cocktail Confidential. Remember, the best way to get better at mixology is to practice. And the best way to do that is in the company of friends and family. Happy cocktailing, everybody.